After studying this module, you shall be able to know what is the importance of cognition, learn the relationship of cognition and other faculties, identify the impact of cognition on its correlates, evaluate application of cognition. In the previous modules, we have been well acquainted with the term and concept of cognition. However, just to review, cognition refers to a set of variables related to quantitative and qualitative type of knowledge and its relationship amongst other types of knowledge elements. An imperative aim of cognitive science is to generate theoretical models that specify how people function. In this module, we will primarily focus on the interaction of cognition with other vital correlates such as intelligence, emotion, language, culture, etc. The text will emphasize the determining impact of cognition on such areas and, in return, how cognitive process is affected by them. In other words, the cause and effect relationship between cognition and its correlates will be explored. The interrelationship between various faculties is highlighted and attempts are directed to answer questions such as, is cognition same as intelligence or a difference can be discerned? What comes first, cognition or emotion? Are cognition and language same fraternities or is personality a predictor of cognition, etc.?
Impact of cognition on its correlates. Cognition and intelligence. There are different views on relationship between cognition and intelligence. There is lack of integration on the view that whether cognition and intelligence are same or different. Majority of the researchers believe that a thin line of difference does exist. However, another view supports that cognition. In line with the former view, cognition can be conceived as a process of integration, accommodation, and application of knowledge. It includes the process by which sensory information can be used, stored, reduced, elaborated, transformed, and recovered for its application to daily life activities. It encompasses the course of how information is acquired and way it is used. Hence, acquisition and application appear to be at the nucleus. Thus, the implicit process of sensation, attention, perception, thinking, learning, memory constitute the cognitive capacity of an individual. Intelligence, on the other hand, is viewed to be included as a part of cognitive process. It entails transforming cognitive knowledge into meaning and explicit application of this knowledge to solve daily life problems. Cognition acts as an umbrella term including all the vital processes such as perception, thinking, memory, attention, and intelligence, indeed being a part of the cognitive process. Also, the fact that intelligence quotient or IQ is a measure of cognitive ability and application of such abilities to understand concepts and solve problems is also clear evidence that cognition and intelligence are two different constructs, whereas former includes the latter. The other view does not define a clear distinction between cognition and intelligence. They believe both the constructs to be similar with no defined boundaries. For instance, Wechsler's adult intelligence scale, on one of the most relied upon intelligence tests, measures intelligence but not common sense. The test is not able to explain why people with equal IQ perceive things differently or why success is life for IQ in gifted range is higher than genius. The difference between the two also seem to fade when emotional intelligence is equated with cognitive intelligence. The term cognitive intelligence here clearly assimilates both the constructs and also separated itself with types of intelligence such as social intelligence, interpersonal intelligence, etc. It has primarily referred to the intellectual abilities such as thinking, reasoning, logical differencing, analyzing, prioritizing, etc. In contrast, emotional intelligence involves the ability to monitor one's own and others' feelings and emotions, to discriminate amongst them, and to use this information to guide one's thinking. Then emotional intelligence comprises of three factors broadly of self and others, that is, appraisal and expression of emotions, regulation of emotions, and utilization of emotions. The concept of emotional intelligence differs itself from conventional interrelationship between cognition and affect, as it does not concentrate primarily on memory or judgment alone, but on holistic general contribution of emotionally to personality. Thus, difference between IQ and EQ is also quite clear. IQ is obtained through a ratio which is an index of a person's ability to learn, understand, and use information in a meaningful way, whereas EQ is an index of person's ability to recognize, appraise, manage, and use one's emotions as well as others so as to facilitate a productive life. IQ deals with abilities of understanding and comprehending information, while EQ deals with recognizing and comprehending emotions. IQ is mathematical and logical powers of an individual, and EQ is the emotional ability towards self and others. In an IQ test, items pertain to logical and abstract reasoning, whereas in EQ tests, scale items relate to emotional responses in different situations. IQ is a strong predictor of success in school, and EQ is a strong predictor of success in life. EQ can be learnt, whereas IQ can't be taught, as a part of it is believed to be innate. Correlation of performance on IQ and EQ is not strong. For example, an autistic child may perform well on IQ but may not have a good index of EQ. IQ determines individual capacities and intelligence, and EQ decides for your teamwork and crisis intervention. Cognition and emotion. The duality between cognition and emotion has fascinated the psychologists and philosophers since centuries. Most of the research in this area has been primarily based on identification of brain areas involved in the dynamic process. The recent development focuses on the interactional fit between both the aspects, giving rise to complex behavior. The attempts of the conventional researchers have been to separate cognitive brain from the emotional brain, whereas the recent trends have opposed such a clear distinction out of three reasons, that is, brain regions involved in cognition are also functional in emotions. Brain regions involved in emotions are also a part of the cognitive process. And cognition and emotion both are integrated in the brain. As a result, dividing the brain into cognitive and affective regions is inherently troublesome and thus not a possibility. However, a clear rejection of either of the views is not a possibility until we delve into the complex process. Conceptualization of cognition and emotion. Cognitive capacity of strong control processes is considered unique to human species. The various domains of cognition, such as attention, memory, perception, and learning, seem to be completely goal-directed and prevented from interferences. The strongest correlate of cognition is neural firing from dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Most of the literature reveals engagement of cortical regions in the cognitive process. However, the same cannot be simply articulated for emotions. There is less agreement on definition of emotions. Nonetheless, some accepted meaning of emotions include it to be states as elicited by rewards and punishers. emerge from conscious appraisal of events, have physiological basis and range from simple, happy to complex moral emotions, pride or jealousy. The brain structures involved in emotion include amygdala, ventral striatum and hypothalamus. The functioning of such subcortical regions mediating emotions is at times believed to be a less conscious process. The human is many times unaware of the stimulus that triggers functioning in emotional brain areas. As a result of the inherent intricate processes involved in both cognition and emotion, it certainly becomes difficult to concretely define both the concepts. Affective brain regions in cognition. There has been constant disagreement over the regions that are purely affective and constitute affective brain. Hypothalamus was one of the primitive regions believed to play a strong role in emotions. Later, robust role of limbic system was identified in emotional regulation. However, the recent trends reveal that many areas in the limbic system, such as hippocampus, were not found to be connected to emotions, and other areas which were observed to control emotions were not included in the limbic system, like orbitoprefrontal cortex. As a result, a pure composition of emotional brain has not been possible. Attempts have been directed to identify core and extended regions of the brain that play a role in emotions. Core regions are primary areas which are believed to have strong functioning, whereas extended regions are those which have almost a secondary role to play in emotional regulation. Examples of core regions include amygdala, hypothalamus, nucleus accumbens, orbitoprefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate cortex, and ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Extended regions include ventral segmental area, hippocampus basal forebrain, prefrontal cortex, anterior temporal lobe, posterior cingulated cortex, and somatosensory cortex. Even with the identification of core and extended regions, the problem doesn't simplify, as many of these regions are also included in the various other cognitive functions. Cognitive brain region in emotions. The prefrontal cortex (PFC) is believed to have a significant role in the control and execution of cognitive functions. It is observed to exhibit critical role in attention, maintenance, and manipulation of information, detection of conflict, and expression of cognitive control in challenging situations. However, as discussed above, PFC is also identified as the extended affective region. Various PFC territories such as anterior cingulated cortex, orbitoprefrontal cortex, and ventromedial prefrontal cortex are involved in emotions. Nonetheless, the recent literature focuses on robust role of PFC in cognitive processes. This duality leads to strong compartmentalization of PFC into areas that control emotions and others that control cognition. For instance, orbitoprefrontal cortex and ventromedial cortex play a role in emotions, whereas dorsolateral prefrontal cortex dominates cognitive control. With such strong heterogeneity, it thus becomes almost a challenge to mark affective brain separate from the cognitive brain. Integration of cognition and emotion. Above text clearly depicts that the view for separation of cognitive and affective brain areas is primarily deficient, and both the fraternities seem to somehow merge with each other. Advancements in the literature have been able to generate evidences for fusion of cognition and emotion, such as depicted in functional studies, structural connectivity, circuits for cognitive emotional integration, and functional connectivity. Functional studies indicate that lateral prefrontal cortex LPFC is the area of integration for both cognition and emotion, especially dorsolateral prefrontal cortex DLPFC, which has primarily been identified as cognitive area, is also believed to be a core affective area. Support for hypothesis comes from working memory studies, behavioral inhibition experiments, and proposals for integration of cognition and motivation. Territories of LPFC such as ventromedial prefrontal cortex, orbitoprefrontal cortex, and anterior cingulate cortex have been found to be the areas where interaction of both emotion and cognition takes place. On the other hand, structural connectivity of anatomical information suggests that many brain region is just a few synapses distant from the other, where brain almost appears as a small world topology. In a research, PFC was found to be most distant from sensory areas, which meant that PFC almost received processed information for higher cognitive treatment. Another finding revealed amygdala as equally distant from sensory areas and as the hub of forming various other cortical connections. This core affective area is thus found to be at nucleus for interaction of cognition and emotion. Cognition and language. The relationship between cognition and language has long amazed cognitivists and linguists. The question whether cognition and language are two separate entities or language emerges from general cognitive abilities still lack a firm conclusion. Also, certain other questions such as do people who speak different languages think differently, or certain development of cognitive abilities is essentially required for language acquisition still pose a challenge. Thus, concerns have been pervasive in the fields of psychology, linguistics, neuroscience, and anthropology. Cognition and personality. The duality of the fact that all people are same and yet none of them are same is a strong challenge for personality theorists. The complexity is also reflected in the impact of individual differences on cognitive capacities. Historically, the attempts have been directed towards finding a plausible link between cognition and personality. With the advent of cognition revolution, the relationship between both the fraternities was first explicated by role of emotions in distortions of cognitive processing by Beck in 1967. Later, effects of state anxiety on cognitive performance were explored by Spielberger in 1972. The relationship of wider variety of traits with cognitive performance has been at focus since long. Recent studies have focused on developing information processing models based on specific traits. Following customized models based on traits have been created to enhance performance in various organizations. Various theories have been proposed which aim to explain the link between cognition and personality from varied angles. First, biological theory. Second, information processing theory. Third, personality and self-regulation theory. Fourth, cognitive and adaptive theory of traits. Link between personality and cognitive domains. The link between personality and various domains of cognition such as attention, distractibility, memory, language, and fluid intelligence have also been stated. Attention and personality are believed to be closely associated. Attention can be understood as the limited capacity of the individual to process selected piece of information. Personality is viewed to influence this limited capacity, like, for example, anxious people generally seem to exhibit attentional deficits and higher distractibility. Extraversion is related to low attention capacity and introversion with greater attention span and lower arousal. Similarly, high impulsivity is related to greater arousal and attentional deficits. In case of personality and distractibility, extraversion and distractibility were found to be positively correlated. Also, neuroticism and anxiety were found to depict higher distractibility. Abnormal personality traits such as schizotypal personality are related with poor executive functioning and higher distractibility. Another imperative cognitive dimension of memory has also been viewed to share personality influences. Extroverts were found to have a higher short-term memory recall but a poor long-term memory. Anxiety and neuroticism as personality variables were found to have detrimental influences on working memory capacity and multitasking by Ashcraft and Cross in 2007. Early studies also established that people with trait anxiety are also more vulnerable to encode threatening stimuli in comparison to people with state anxiety, and also depict a memory bias in recall of threatening stimuli than neutral stimuli.
Summary: cognition reflects quantitative and qualitative type of knowledge and its relationship with other faculties of knowledge. The interactional fit of cognition with other variables such as intelligence, emotions, language, personality, culture, etc. enables a holistic perspective to the vitality and application of cognition in our daily lives. Cognition and intelligence, though perceived similar, are two different fraternities, where cognition is an umbrella term and intelligence is one of the domains of cognition. Cognition can be understood as the process of acquisition and internalization of knowledge, whereas intelligence involves giving meaning to the cognitive knowledge and applying it to solve everyday problems. Cognitive intelligence is indexed by intelligence quotient (IQ) and emotional intelligence is gauged by emotional quotient (EQ). Form an integral part of intelligence. IQ deals with the abilities of understanding and comprehending information, while EQ deals with recognizing and comprehending emotions. The relationship of cognition and emotion cannot be understood as two separate independent faculties, but rather as interacting with each other to produce complex behavior. The interplay of cognition and language is viewed in use of speech in everyday problem solving. Cognition is considered as powerful entity with set of various mental abilities including language. However, different brain regions are observed in functioning of cognition and language. Cognition and personality both are viewed to impact each other. Various factors of personality such as introversion, extraversion, neuroticism, psychoticism, conscientiousness have been well correlated with cognitive variables such as attention, memory, language, fluid intelligence, etc.